Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Share your stories with us. Maybe the next betrayal story will be from your city, and we start. Throughout their adult lives, Russell and Carol West were a model couple. Both were from a small town in the Midwestern United States, where everyone knew each other by name and where divorce was not accepted unless absolutely necessary. They got married right after school. Russell got a job at a construction company, and Carol got a job teaching mathematics at the very school they had once graduated from. Soon they had children, a girl and a boy, to whom they gave all their love. The children grew up, started their own families, and moved to different states. The couple were left alone in a spacious house on a quiet suburban street. Their relationship always seemed outwardly calm and harmonious. Russell, then still young and strong, spent almost all of his time on construction sites, returning home covered in cement dust, tired, but always ready to argue with Carol about where to go on vacation or which bike to buy for his son. Carol happily taught other people's children arithmetic and geometry, and took overtime to provide the family with a stable income in case Russell suddenly had no contracts. At times they argued like all normal couples. Sometimes they lived for months in a dense cycle of affairs and hardly spoke to each other heart to heart. But no matter what happened around them, they remained faithful to each other. Both had no thoughts about something on the side. They were each other's first, and it seemed the only ones forever. But the years passed. Russell, who had worked as a builder for almost 35 years, gradually began to give in. His back was making itself felt from heavy physical exertion, and his hands were no longer as dexterous as in his youth. When he was offered the position of technical supervision inspector in the city administration, he did not immediately agree, but still realized that this would save his health and provide a stable income. He began to spend more time in the office and move less. As a result, one thing led to another. Health problems accumulated, and with them came difficulties in the intimate sphere. Carol, at first glance, remained cheerful and active. But after losing her school she quit a few years ago due to reforms, downsizing, and personal burnout, she suddenly fell into a strange nostalgia for lost opportunities. She looked back more and more often, wondering if she had come to terms with the role of a caring mother and wife of a reliable, but somewhat boring man too soon. Despite the fact that she was 55, she looked younger than her years. A slender figure, a neat haircut, and an intelligent face. Everything was fine with the children. The grandchildren were growing up, but she herself seemed to be short of breath. To make up for the gaps, Carol joined the gym and began vigorously toning up her body, hoping to regain at least some of her former sense of freshness in life. It was in this very gym, where she began to go every day, that Carol met Jace Hardy, a young and confident fitness trainer. He was 30 years younger, but he acted as if the age difference was nothing. Tall, muscular, with a dazzling smile and easy dimples on his cheekbones, Jace charmed his clients with his open attitude and emphasis on caring for the figure. But in the depths of his eyes, behind the external self-confidence, there was a cold, almost predatory squint. He knew perfectly well how to manipulate women who lacked attention. Carol was so blinded that she almost didn't notice how she was crossing that invisible line that once separated her from intrigues and love adventures. She felt that she was deceiving Russell, and at first felt remorse, but the thirst, almost physical, to regain her lost youth turned out to be stronger. Jace, for his part, greedily caught her touch, enjoyed her excitement, and was amazed at how balanced Carol was able to simultaneously live on two fronts: a home where a caring husband and an established way of life, and a gym where everything is completely different: passion, pulse, sweat on the skin, crumpled towels, and half-inarticulate promises to meet again. However, it was not possible to hide it for long. At some point, the arrogance and passion of both crossed the line of reasonable caution. Returning home early. Russell arrived home an hour and a half earlier than usual. His work in recent days has been hectic. A large-scale inspection of construction projects was taking place in the city, and the inspectors either had extra paperwork or, on the contrary, Everything was decided before it had even really begun. Today turned out to be such that he was released after lunch. Russell bought a basket of strawberries from a roadside farmer and decided to please his wife with a little surprise. After all, it was the spring season. They loved evening desserts with fruit and cream. Entering the house, he immediately noticed the unusual silence. Usually at this time, Carol turned on music, did household chores, or laid out vegetables purchased at the nearest market around the kitchen. But now only confused voices were heard from the depths of the corridor. Russell, without taking off his shoes, walked a few steps forward and suddenly saw the front door open. A young man in sweatpants and a t-shirt stood in the doorway, holding sneakers and a bottle of water. Next to him is Carol in a light housecoat, belted so casually that her bare hips were visible from under it. Carol turned around, saw her husband, and froze for a moment, as if a spark of embarrassment flashed inside her. But her eyes almost immediately became cold and tenacious, as if she had prepared a certain role for herself in advance. Hi, the young man said, looking from Carol to Russell. Hello, Russell responded, not understanding what was happening. He felt that everything inside him had broken. A cold wave pierced my back. Carol took a cautious step forward. Her voice sounded quiet, but there was neither a vibration of fear nor a note of repentance in it. I thought you'd come back later, she said. Well, since it happened so, I want to introduce you. This is Jace Hardy, my coach. Jace grinned and extended his hand, but immediately realized that Russell was not going to shake it and awkwardly withdrew his hand back. A faint blush of embarrassment or perhaps confusion appeared on his cheek. Your coach, Russell repeated in a hoarse voice, and he leaves our house. In this form? Yes, Carol said shortly, and irritation flared in her voice. Why do you look like I'm committing a crime? Russell looked at his wife silently, trying to find words, but his tongue was speechless. He suddenly realized that perhaps no words were needed. Everything is obvious. The robe, the presence of a strange man in the house, the door wide open. God, how obvious it all looks. Training is over, Jace said unctuously. I'm on my way, Carol. See you tomorrow? Carol nodded at him as if nothing had happened, and then she looked at her husband. In her gaze one could read a firm decision to say what had long been brewing inside her, and apparently she no longer wanted to waste her energy on deception. Russell, I know it's a shock, but I won't hide. Listen, if you love me, accept it. Jace will do what you can't. She said these words as coldly as if she were talking about choosing wallpaper or changing car tires. The young lover, waiting for Carol to finish, nodded briefly and, as if solemnly complimenting her speech, walked out the threshold. Everything was quiet. All that remained was the sound of the handle hitting the door frame and the muffled ticking of the clock in the living room. Broken. Several interminably long seconds passed before Russell could sigh and throw the basket of strawberries onto the dresser. Warm berries scattered across the polished surface, some fell to the floor. Carol flinched but didn't move. Why are you silent? She said sharply. Better speak up. Take it and yell at me. Throw something. Tell me I'm rubbish. I don't care. A bitter lump in his throat prevented Russell from speaking. When he finally collected his thoughts, he could only whisper hoarsely. How? Long ago. A few months, she answered dryly. I think it's important for you to know, right? Months. Russell suddenly weakened and sank heavily into a chair. Carol, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with me? When did this start? Why? She took a few hesitant steps and wrapped herself in a robe, although it seemed that she was not threatened with shame. The shoulders were shaking, but the eyes remained amazingly dry. Because I'm tired of being invisible. Tired of feeling like my body is not needed. You devoted yourself to your work, to your health problems, which you pretend to solve, but in fact you simply neglected. I wanted to be loved, wanted, touched. And Jace, he made me feel that I could still be desired, that I'm a woman. Russell felt the weight of those words fall upon him. He was afraid to imagine with what kind of touches, with what mutual glances and training this betrayal began. He knew that the last few years everything had been wrong, especially in bed. However, he could not imagine that Carol would go so far as to simply accept a lover into the house without experiencing a drop of remorse. They were silent for a minute. Then Carol spoke again. Listen, I don't want to get a divorce. It's funny, but I really don't want it. Our marriage is part of my life, part of me. I love you in my own way, but it breaks me every day from the thought that no one needs me as a woman. If you can humble yourself and understand, if you can allow me to do this, we won't have to ruin everything. A loud "to hell" was pounding in Russell's temples. He understood that Carol was actually demanding the impossible from him to agree to the role of a helpless witness to her affair. But instead of starting to yell, he fell silent, slowly stood up, walked into the bedroom, and slammed the door, leaving her alone with the scattered berries. Internal split. The evening passed in unbearable silence. Carol came to the bedroom door several times, listened, but did not dare to enter. Russell never left there, only once called someone on the phone. When it got dark, he went out to the kitchen, got some water without looking at his wife, and came back. He thought about taking the car and driving to a motel, but damn it, this is his home. Their common house, built back in the era when it was the pride of the construction team. Scenes flashed through his head in fragments. Carol in a dressing gown with this impudent man, her gaze contemptuously decisive, turned inside out. If you love me, accept it. How could she throw it in my face without a hint of regret? What the hell is going on? He slept for 2 hours in fits and starts, clenching his fists until they turned white. The dream was restless. In a dream, he saw himself standing on an unfinished building and trying to hold the metal beams so that they would not fall down, but the metal structures were torn in his hands, flying down, and only fragments fell to the floor at his feet. When he woke up, he realized that his marriage, his life, it was all collapsing, broken into fragments of hopelessness. By morning, Russell felt strangely empty and focused at the same time. He got up, washed, and put himself in order. He left the bedroom and found Carol in the living room. She was sitting in a chair, hugging herself with her arms and silently looking at the turned-off TV. Without saying a word, he came up, sat down opposite her, and began to examine her face. She avoided his gaze. I don't know what to do, he finally said dully. I never thought I'd hear something like this from you. I... She began, but stopped short, apparently at a loss for words. But I can't just pick up and leave, he interrupted. I won't let you erase me from our own life, which we have been building for years. Carol's lips twitched. Perhaps conflicting feelings were fighting inside her, but some kind of evil determination, a mixture of resentment and indignation, still made its way to the surface. And what do you propose, Russell? Her voice sounded tired. I want to understand how far you are willing to go, and how far I myself can tolerate it. Carol thought for a moment, as if weighing whether to continue. But then she blurted out, I no longer have the strength to play the exemplary wife. I'm tired of being the good girl. I don't want to drown in sadness anymore. And if you want to stay with me as your wife, you will have to accept Jace's existence. Or, you can leave, but I won't leave home. This is my life too. Anger flashed in Russell's eyes. It seemed that he was ready to take off and throw something against the wall. But he restrained himself. He stood up. Fine. See you in the evening, he said, and, grabbing his jacket, left the house. Family disaster brewing. No one at work noticed that anything was wrong with Russell. He looked as concentrated as ever, if a little more silent. His assistant Harry, accustomed to the fact that the inspector rarely chats in vain, did not ask unnecessary questions, and Russell himself kept repeating this wild phrase in his head. Now he will do what you cannot. He couldn't understand the real scale of the disaster, Carol's betrayal, her betrayal, or is her cold determination to get him to take it. In the afternoon, his children called him his son and daughter. A son living with family in another state asked his father for advice on how to replace the roofing on their home. The daughter, on the contrary, simply called to find out how her parents were doing and heard the same calm, expressionless voice. Russell tried to show with all his appearance that nothing special had happened, and in the chest, meanwhile, an echoing emptiness grew. Returning back in the evening, he suddenly realized that he did not want to go home. I imagined finding Carol there, and maybe Jace too. The thought of this young predator walking around his house made him furious, but he didn't have a clear plan of what to do. Stop by the bar, to a close friend. He doesn't have such close friends to whom he can tell everything. After all, Russell has always been a reserved person. All the way he racked his brains until he realized that he needed to calm down and return to at least clarify the situation. He had no intention of retreating. First skirmish. The light was on in the house. The living room was empty, but voices could be heard from the bedroom. Russell felt the blood begin to pulsate furiously in his temples. He took a few steps and pushed the door. The scene he saw was disgustingly consistent with his terrible guesses. Two people were sitting on the bed, Carol and Jace. They only had half their clothes on. Judging by their breathing and disheveled hair, they interrupted something much more intimate than a conversation. "That's it," Russell whispered with a creepy grin. "You didn't even bother to wait until I fell asleep or went on a business trip." Carol immediately stood up, hastily trying to put on her robe, but Jace, on the contrary, remained seated, defiantly looking at Russell with icy challenge. "Hey man, you know this is inevitable," Jace said, mocking in his voice. "She wants it herself, and you have nothing to do with it." Everything inside Russell caught fire. Shame, anger, humiliation. He realized that this is exactly what the guy was trying to achieve to piss him off, to hurt him. Stepping forward, Russell grabbed Jace's shirt and yanked him up. "You will leave my house." "Immediately," he muttered through his teeth. "Russell, don't you dare hit him," Carol screamed, grabbing her husband's shoulder. "You don't understand what you're doing." "No, Carol, you don't understand." Russell pushed her away with one hand and with the other held Jace so that the fabric of his t-shirt crackled. "This is my home, my life, and you," he looked at the guy with hatred, "burst in here and think that this is the boss?" "Go away, old man," Jace muttered, trying to free himself. "Live as you want, but Carol is not your thing. If she comes to me, then it's your own fault that you couldn't satisfy her needs." The insult burned Russell, and he raised his fist. The words, "old man," hit the ego like a red-hot sting. However, at that moment Carol grabbed her husband's hand and screamed, "Enough! Don't you dare! I'll go straight to the police if you lay a finger on him. Can you hear me?" Russell froze for a moment, clenching his jaw. He understood that in the eyes of the law he would look like an aggressor, even with all his rightness and the savagery of the situation. With an angry grimace, he pushed Jace away, who stumbled back and barely managed to keep himself from falling. "Get out," Russell ordered, looking into the eyes of someone who didn't seem afraid at all. "That's enough for today." Jace silently wiped his lips, grinned, and slowly put on his sneakers. He apparently deliberately hesitated for another minute, and then said with contempt, "You can't kick me out. This is just the beginning. I come when Carol wants, not you. So see you, old man." With these words, he walked into the corridor, slammed the door, and left. A heavy silence hung in the bedroom like lead. Carol stood up, the tumbled pillow falling off the bed. She met her husband's gaze. It was no longer just melancholy, but icy determination, almost madness. She took a step back. "He's right. I call him myself when I want." Russell didn't answer. He just bent down, picked up the pillow, and threw it on the bed. Then, without saying a word, he left. Soon Russell was already driving his car through the streets of the town, trying to stay away from those roads where he could collide with a neighbor or acquaintance. He needed to collect his thoughts. How to find out everything about Jace? How to bring him into the open, make him leave Carol's life? He stopped at a lone food trailer where construction workers sometimes ate lunch, ordered a to-go coffee, and got back into the car. There, slowly, he began to study social networks, scrolling through the accounts of the local fitness room where Jace worked. Jace Hardy's page was open, but there was little information. Beautiful photos from the beach, a demonstration of muscle relief, several pretentious posts about motivation and fortitude. No hint of family, no details about previous place of residence. Too clean, Russell thought. It's like he's deliberately not telling anything serious about himself. He scrolled through the comments. Women of all ages left rave reviews, but they didn't contain specifics, only praise and heart-shaped emoticons. Only once was it mentioned that Jace came from somewhere in the northern regions. Neither the city, nor the date, nor the reasons for the move were specified. Getting to the bottom of this via the internet was not easy. But Russell knew that now everything would be decided by real life, not virtual life. "We'll have to come out of the shadows," he muttered, "but for now it's quiet." That same evening, having asked to leave work a little early, he went to the gym, where Carol met Jace. I parked on a nearby street so as not to attract attention. At first, I just watched from the car. People in tracksuits flashed through the transparent doors. Someone was leaving, someone was entering. At about 7 in the evening, Jace himself came down the steps, that same self-confident, handsome guy in a black t-shirt and sweatpants. Two young clients walked next to him, laughing cheerfully. Russell filmed it all with his camera, trying to remain unnoticed. Then Jace got on a motorcycle and, putting on a helmet, rode towards the outskirts. Russell waited, thinking that maybe Carol would appear right away, but she didn't. Then he hesitated, started the engine, and headed along the route where his lover had gone. I had to keep my distance, not too close so that Jace wouldn't notice he was being followed. He turned on his headlights and followed him for half a block, trying not to lose him, but also not to attract attention. About 10 minutes later, Jace stopped at a low apartment building along a narrow alley. The two-story building looked, frankly, like student housing or housing for those who have not yet gotten a normal job. And then an assumption crept into Russell's head. Either Jace doesn't have enough money, or he spends it so much that he can't afford anything more decent. Russell parked under the trees, watching as Jace walked up the stairs and disappeared behind a shabby door with a worn number 12. Now all the information Russell had was an address, but this was already enough to start acting. Returning home, he did not find Carol. The house was dark, and there was a note on the kitchen table. "Don't wait for me. I'll go for a walk with a friend. I'll stay with her." Russell just gritted his teeth. Girlfriend, huh? Well, well. However, this was even to his advantage now. While she is away, he can calmly call and talk without fear that she will overhear. He dialed an old friend, Nick Bradley, a man who had once served in the local police department and was now a small executive in a nearby town. Previously, they had repeatedly communicated on matters related to inspections of construction sites and fire safety standards. Bradley was famous for his ability to get any information, including what was not officially disclosed. "Hi, Nick," Russell said hoarsely. "Yes, it's me. Listen, I have a situation here. I'd like to check on someone. Unofficially, of course." He briefly recounted the essence. A young coach has appeared in the city. He is actively muddying the waters, and somehow he can't believe that everything is clean in his biography. He asked me to look into the database. Maybe in some states, the guy has a criminal record, debts, and most importantly, whether he really received a license as a fitness instructor. Nick listened intently and asked clarifying questions. "Well," Bradley finally responded, "I'll see what I can do, friend. But I don't promise super results. Although, I have a couple of channels." Russell breathed a sigh of relief. If anyone can find a way to find fault with this Hardy, it's Nick. The town is small, all connections are visible, but it happens that people from other districts try to start a new life in quiet places. And this new life is not always as legal as they want. The next afternoon, as Russell sat in his modest office, his cell phone vibrated. "Hello," came Bradley's hoarse voice. "Do you have a minute?" "Certainly. Speak." "Well, I did some digging. It looks like your Jace Hardy is registered on some online trainer registry, but in fact, he doesn't have a license. I paid for several certification courses that are not recognized by any normal sports center, and those gyms where he previously tried to work either closed or changed owners. which is very suspicious. And now the most interesting thing. In one of the towns north of ours, he appeared in a blackmail case. This was a couple of years ago. Officially, there was no prison or serious punishment, but there were a couple of statements from women. For some reason, the case did not go to court. Perhaps he paid compensation or intimidated the applicants. There is no exact information. Everything has been hushed up. Russell listened to these snippets with bated breath. His heart was pounding, as if signaling that he was on the right path. So he has experience in blackmail. Yeah, and from what I could tell, he specialized in mature women, Bradley snorted. Seduction, and then various methods of extortion. I think it's a familiar pattern. Listen, but I didn't tell you anything officially, okay? Of course, Russell responded. Thank you, Nick. You saved me. He put down the phone and sat for a long time, staring at the empty wall. Here it was, confirmation of his worst fears. So this Hardy is a professional gigolo or something like that, using the vulnerability of women to force them to either pay or endure threats. And Carol, she was caught in his web. Maybe without realizing it, or maybe she doesn't care anymore. That explains the impudence with which he behaves in my house, Russell thought. But how can we now turn things around in such a way as to get rid of this person once and for all? Carol didn't show up for dinner again. At 8:30, Russell was staring at his cell phone, wondering if he should call her. But he had neither the desire nor the strength to find out where she spent her time. It's better to do the main thing, collect evidence that, if anything, will allow Hardy to be pinned down. He went into the office and found in the drawer an old voice recorder that he had once used to record construction consultations. I checked the batteries, everything worked. If I talk to him, I need to write everything down, Russell decided. And yet he left the house, unable to sit alone. He drove to the same apartment building where Jace was staying and took his usual place under the trees. The clock showed almost 10 in the evening when a lamp belatedly began to blink in a narrow alley. Finally, the door with the number 12 swung open. Jace came out, followed by Carol. Their figures in the light of the lantern were visible quite clearly. She said something in a low voice. He leaned towards her, from time to time hugging her shoulders. Gritting his teeth, Russell took the camera and took several pictures through the front glass. He wanted to jump out and scream, but he remembered Nick's words, "Do everything carefully." And he himself understood that open conflict was not needed yet. "Let them think that I'm broken," he whispered under his breath, but everything was boiling inside. Jace and Carol got on the motorcycle. He handed her the helmet and confidently patted the saddle. Russell saw his wife tentatively grab his waist. The engine roared and the motorcycle sped away. For a minute or two Russell sat still, listening to his own heavy breathing. Then, without waiting for them to return, he started the car and slowly drove back. How should I contact her now? He mentally asked himself. Is she really that blinded, or is there something she's not talking about? For now, however, Jace remained the main target. It was necessary to consolidate information about his past, to obtain irrefutable facts. He already threatened me, but that's nothing. Now, if I catch him blackmailing Carol or anyone else, then he'll definitely end up in a puddle, thought Russell, turning onto a familiar street. For several days, everything went according to a similar scenario. Russell left home as early as possible, disappearing until late in the evening, as if trying to avoid his wife. At the same time, he called Nick to clarify new details. He sent him some clippings from local newspapers in the Northern District in a general email, but warned him in advance. Don't appear in any authority. You had no right to see these copies. The articles were scanty, but one of the notes talked about a certain J. Hardy, who was listed as the organizer of an amateur fitness course without the necessary certification, and in another about a dubious, healthy lifestyle club where several women complained of psychological pressure. No criminal charges were brought against the man, but there were questions about the man. And stuff like that. It seems that the owner of these charges slipped out of town in time. Without a direct complaint from the victims, the case was not resolved. After reading everything, Russell saved the files to a flash drive and put them in a safe place. He knew that such incriminating evidence had to be used wisely. If the cards are shown too early, Jace could get away with it, leave, or worse, deal with Russell himself on a physical level. But he didn't want to fight and then justify himself to the police. One evening, Carol returned to the house and found Russell in the kitchen. He sat at the table, laying out several papers printed on the printer in front of him. Her eyes immediately froze warily on the sheets. "Hello," she said dryly, standing at the door frame. "What do you have?" "Materials about your Jace," Russell answered evenly, without changing his position. "Confirmation that he does not have a trainer's license and some evidence of his past activities. You didn't know that he was blackmailing?" Carol turned pale, but pressed her lips together and came closer. "Why do you need all this?" she said nervously. "Do you want to scare me?" "You? No." Russell leaned back in his chair. "I want you to understand who is standing next to you. This person can ruin your life. I wouldn't care, but damn it, we're married and I can't turn a blind eye when you let this creep come under our roof." "You're making it all up," Carol blurted out with an unexpectedly angry intonation. Even if there was something there, maybe it was slander. Maybe he just didn't have time to complete the paperwork. "You're just trying to smear him to get me back." "Do you think so?" Russell chuckled. He looked at the papers again. "I don't need shenanigans to get you back, Carol. If you wanted me, this whole story wouldn't exist. I'm just suggesting that you face the truth. Your trainer is a common scammer." She turned away and began to breathe rapidly, as if holding back tears or rage. Then she said quietly, almost in a whisper, "Even if you're right, I don't care. Don't mess with me." Russell pursed his lips, crumpled the paper in front of him, and stood up. "Okay, but don't say later that I didn't warn you." Throwing the crumpled sheet on the table, he walked past her, trying not to touch her with his shoulder. Carol returned home late when the clock hands had already passed midnight. The house was plunged into twilight, only a floor lamp was burning in the living room, and its soft light fell on Russell sleeping in an armchair. He dozed with his arms crossed over his chest, like a tired man who would prefer to be somewhere far away at this hour, but by the will of circumstances is forced to guard his own home. Hearing the knock of the front door, he opened one eye. Carol stood on the threshold, leaning her shoulder against the doorframe. The slight smell of alcohol, although she had never been particularly prone to libations, mixed with the suffocating aroma of perfume that clearly did not belong to their common home. Her shoulders were slightly upturned, her gaze defiantly directed towards her husband. "Are you awake?" she said with a mocking grin. "I didn't fall asleep," he answered hoarsely, slowly straightening up in his chair. "I was waiting for you. I wanted to talk." She reluctantly walked into the living room and sat down on the edge of the sofa. The dress, draped over a lace top, wrinkled at the knees. Carol touched the strap with some laziness, as if expecting Russell to pull it back. But he, contrary to her expectations, remained silent and only waited for her to speak. Finally, Carol, unable to bear his heavy gaze, sighed. "Well, what do you have there? Another lecture on morality." Russell looked away and looked at the light of the floor lamp, as if wondering whether it was worth starting this conversation at all. But then he said quietly, "I know you've been doing this on purpose lately. You want to demonstratively show that your relationship with Jace is already something more than a secret connection. But why bring everything to complete absurdity?" Carol looked at him skeptically. "To the point of absurdity?" she asked again. "Maybe it was you who drove me to the point of absurdity. I'm tired of hiding. Since you have decided to allow me everything, then don't interfere. And let's avoid tragic intonations, okay? You yourself don't mind." Her words sounded like mockery. Russell felt the familiar cold fire of anger ignite inside him, not a flash of rage, but precisely the icy, suppressed anger that had become familiar to him over the past weeks. But he restrained himself. "I told you I wasn't going to leave this house. But I didn't say that I would allow everything and not react. However, you act as if I'm not here." She smiled wryly. "Don't you see? You don't exist. You run away in the mornings, hide in the evenings, and return only after dark. I'm almost used to living without you. Perhaps such a direct statement would once have taken Russell's breath away, but now he only felt an invisible spring compressing inside. He understood that no sensible conversation would emerge that evening. All Carol can say is to continue her line of defiant independence. "Okay," he said hoarsely, rising from his chair. "You are apparently in no condition to perceive my words. Sleep." Without waiting for an answer, he left the room, leaving her sitting on the sofa, and before Carol shouted something after him, he was already climbing the stairs to where he had a small former workroom converted into a storage room. It was there that he now spent the night, trying not to intersect with his wife again. That night he did not sleep a wink until almost dawn, thinking that it seemed that the limit had come in her behavior. But the following week showed that Carol's limit had not yet been set. On Friday evening, when Russell's work hours ended earlier than usual, he decided to return home before 7. On the threshold of the garage, he noticed someone else's car, a beat-up pickup truck, apparently rented from a local rental station. The car was parked almost right next to the entrance. What other news? He was embarrassed. Jace was on a motorcycle, so someone else. But deep down, he suspected that this pickup could also belong to Jace. Maybe he needed to transport something, or he just decided to change vehicles. Entering the house, Russell heard loud voices from the living room. And not just voices, laughter, festive toasts, the clinking of glasses. He walked forward and froze in the doorway. There, at the set table, sat Carol and Jace. In the middle of the table is a bottle of strong alcohol, plates of snacks, and 3 empty glasses. Carol, noticing him, smiled widely, but there was not a shadow of kindness in this smile. "Oh, here he is, and here we thought that you wouldn't come today. Sit down, Russell, we're celebrating." She glanced sideways at Jace, who grinned and refilled his glass. "What are you celebrating?" Russell asked dryly, his gaze lingering on the third glass. "Our new life," Carol said cheerfully, raising her glass and making a toast. "For the 3 of us." A second of silence. Russell felt the ground seem to shake under his feet. He silently looked around the 2 of them, and at this table set for 3 people. "For the 3 of us?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. "Yes," Carol confirmed, placing her glass on the tablecloth. "I decided that all this mystery was enough. If my husband, as he says, wants to stay in the house but doesn't interfere, then let's do everything openly. Isn't that right?" Jace leaned back in his chair and smiled cheekily. His t-shirt was raised slightly, exposing his abs, and he deliberately showed casualness, as if his presence here was something taken for granted. "By the way, I don't mind, old man," he added, drawing out his words. "Want to join the fun? We can discuss everything together, freely." Russell understood that this was a dirty challenge, a provocation aimed at finishing him off mentally. He clenched his fists in his jacket pockets to keep from falling. The feeling of humiliation and anger was mixed with a realization. They arranged all this on purpose to see my reaction. "I think I'll refuse," he answered quietly, meeting Carol's gaze. "You obviously have already drunk enough to have such conversations." But Carol didn't want to let him go so easily. "Why do you look at me like I'm a stranger? Do you think I don't notice that you're playing detective, that you're trying to dig up some dirt on Jace? I don't care. I said if you don't like it, you can leave. But if you stay, then accept our troika. Am I not clear?" Her eyes flashed furiously. Meanwhile, Jace added wood to the fire. "Stop pretending to be a red deer, Russell. Admit it. You yourself may be curious about what it's like when there is a real man in the house who can please a woman." These words finally ignited the dull rage smoldering in Russell's chest. But he didn't want to give them a reason for a show, so he just chuckled, suppressing the urge to snap. "Have fun as you please. Just don't touch me. I warned you. This is my home, and I will not leave it. You can behave as you like, but when the time comes, everyone will get what they deserve." "Wow," Carol said mockingly. "What a demonic voice, isn't it?" She turned to Jace, arching a sly eyebrow. "It seems to me that these are empty threats." He won't do anything. Jace smiled mockingly in response and reached his hand to Carol's waist, pulling her a little closer. This revealing hug in the presence of her husband added fuel to the fire. But Russell, without uttering a word, turned and walked towards the stairs, deciding that he needed to get away from this scene as quickly as possible before he became rude. "Where are you going?" Carol's mockery caught up with him. "We prepared a glass for you, too." He didn't answer. He went upstairs, slamming the door to his closet bedroom behind him. There, breathing heavily and slamming his fist on the wall, he realized that the situation was reaching some kind of crazy stage. Carol already openly talks about the three, insults him without blinking an eye, and Jace only pours his cold arrogance into the fire. "She wants to force me to do something rash," Russell thought, trying to calm his breathing, "or checking to see if I'm broken. But I'm not broken. I still keep them in my sights." He remembered his folder with documents, notes, and photos, and a plan was brewing in his head. Perhaps it was time to act more decisively, and yet he understood that every wrong step could give rise to calling him an aggressor, and then he would no longer dictate the terms. The next day, the situation repeated itself. On Saturday morning, Carol, quite sober and collected, began to act as if Jace's presence in the house was a natural given. She tidied up the living room and arranged the chairs so that there were three of them near the TV instead of two as before. Russell could not help but notice these changes when he went downstairs. "What's happening?" he asked, staring at the new arrangement. "I'm waiting for a guest," she answered with feigned innocence. "We want to watch a film. If you want, join." He began to feel disgusted by such a deliberate demonstration of open relationships. Deep down, Russell still clung to the hope that Carol would come to her senses if she realized who Jace really was. But she stubbornly ignored all his warnings, and now she went into open provocation. "No," he answered coldly. "Watching a movie with you is the last thing I want." Carol remained silent, continuing to straighten the blanket on the sofa. And yet, when Jace actually appeared an hour later, Russell, by force of will, remained in the hallway and did not leave. He wanted to see with his own eyes what kind of performance they were going to put on. Jace, entering the house, pulled back the hood of his sweatshirt and lazily greeted the owner with a downward glance. "Hello, old man. I didn't expect to meet you here." "I live here," Russell muttered. "Or did you decide that I emigrated?" "Well, you never know." Hardy shrugged, grinning. "The situation is conducive to freedom." He walked past as if nothing had happened and headed straight into the living room, where Carol was already waiting with a cup of coffee. Russell, pretending to look for something in the hallway table drawer, remained half a step behind. My hearing caught snippets of their conversation. They were discussing some stupid action movie they were going to watch. Half an hour later, muffled giggles, and then the sounds of kissing were heard from the living room. "Don't they understand that I hear everything?" Russell thought, gritting his teeth. Of course they understand. Moreover, they understand and deliberately flaunt it in order to finish him off. He took his coat, went outside, and got into the car, not knowing where to go. At such moments, he felt like an outcast in his own home. But he didn't want to leave for good, then everything he fought for would pass into the power of Jace. "Let them think that this is breaking me, but I'll just wait it out," Russell convinced himself. He turned on the engine and drove towards the nearest bar, where he sometimes met a neighbor, but in the end he stopped. "No, not the time." "I stopped in a vacant lot outside the city, where cottages were once built and construction is now frozen." He took out a cigarette he had quit smoking a long time ago, but one pack was in the glove compartment. Now the nervous tension was so great that he lit a cigarette, wincing disgustingly from the bitter smoke. Carol literally lost her brakes, he reflected. I never thought she would go this far. And this scoundrel rascal took advantage of her weakness, made her dependent, and he believes that now their union is unshakable. But Russell was not ready to give up. He had all the necessary facts in his hands, and he was already waiting for the promised inspection, which Nick Bradley was going to set up in the gym in order to crack Jace for illegal activities. Perhaps this will be the first step towards getting him out of the city. When there's enough pressure, we'll see how cool he is, Russell said through his teeth, exhaling acrid smoke through the lowered window. That evening, when he returned, he found a strange silence in the house. Only in the bedroom the light was on. He was about to go to his room, but from behind the slightly open door he heard muffled voices. He carefully leaned towards the crack. Carol and Jace were in the bedroom, and judging by the poses that could be seen, they were cuddling on the bed. But the main thing that bothered Russell were the words that Carol pronounced with intoxicating slowness. Maybe we should invite him. I want him to see that I can. She didn't finish, but it was clear from her intonations that she was talking about something very intimate. Should I invite Russell? Jace asked mockingly. Are you kidding? No, I'm not joking. He already sees everything anyway, she answered hoarsely. Maybe he should join. Russell froze. There was an unpleasant ache in his chest, as if someone had hit him, not with a fist, but with words, mocking his most intimate. He realized Carol had already lost so much sense of proportion that she was ready to drag him into the troika, as if it were a banal adventure. Maybe she spoke half jokingly, or maybe seriously. Both were not typical of her in the past, which means she has already gone much further than he thought. Ha ha, Jace laughed, but his laugh sounded forced. My girl, I'm not sure that I want to see the old man's face when you and I. Stop it, she interrupted, and there was something painfully obsessed in her voice. I've thought of everything. He won't leave, and it just turns me on, thinking that he's nearby. Maybe let him have a look, huh? Maybe he should have a look, huh? Repeated in his head. Russell felt a sharp, nauseating feeling. He realized that if he went inside now, he would see a scene that he could not look at without disgust. And if he remains silent, he will only strengthen their confidence that he submits and is ready to turn into an object of ridicule. He did the only thing possible for himself. He loudly slammed the door in the corridor, letting him know that he was here, that he could hear, and moved downstairs with quick steps. There was a fussy rustling behind me, then Carol's voice. Russell, are you home already? He didn't answer, walked out the threshold, took a deep breath of cool air, and sank heavily onto the porch. He was trembling, both from disgust and from the endless tension of the last days. If he had once doubted that it could be worse than simple betrayal, now he understood that yes, it could. That a wife is capable of bringing this situation to a frightening grotesque when a traitor lives with her in front of her legal husband, and she herself no longer sees the boundaries of decency. She thinks I'm broken, he thought. Otherwise, she wouldn't flirt and provoke so openly. And I'm not broken, but I need to endure, wait for the moment. He caught himself with his heart literally jumping out of his chest and his fists clenching on their own. Someday he will lose his temper if he doesn't find a civilized way to knock Jace out and regain his quiet life. The face was covered with sweat. We must act, Russell ordered himself. The next day, Sunday morning, Carol demonstrated again. She appeared in the kitchen arm in arm with Jace, both in simple dressing gowns, as if the man had been registered here for a long time and felt like the owner. Seeing Russell, they were not embarrassed, but on the contrary, Carol announced loudly, remember when I said that a 3 is normal? So, think again. Maybe it's worth a try. For example, I don't see a problem. And you? Jace stood nearby, calmly pouring himself some coffee. Looking at Russell's face, he only smirked at the edge of his lips. This is a scene especially for me, Russell realized. They want to take him to the edge, to see whether he will jump into the abyss or not. Thank you for the offer, he muttered, looking them both in the eyes, but I passed. I have my own principles, no matter how much you laugh at them. Principles, Carol repeated venomously. It's funny to hear about this from a person who has been bullying everyone for the last few weeks. Principles. It would be better if you left long ago, if you can't stand such a life. Russell didn't answer. He quickly finished his morning tea, threw his mug into the sink, and walked out as if he didn't care about this conversation. Although in fact everything inside was rushing around like in an iron cauldron. At lunchtime, the three of them crossed paths again in the corridor, and every time Russell made eye contact with Jace, he smiled provocatively, sometimes exchanging glances with Carol. It feels like the couple decided to completely incinerate him mentally. But I have cards up my sleeve, Russell quietly reminded himself. A little more and I'll prank them. After lunch, he called Nick Bradley. He said that they were working out a plan to check the gym for the next week. Our guys will appear there any day, suddenly. Let's see what documents your friend will present. If anything, perhaps we can find more reasons to put pressure. Hope this helps. After hanging up, Russell realized that a test was coming, and if it went as planned, Jace would find himself in an unpleasant situation. Two directions at once. Illegal business plus fake certificates are already enough for him to be slapped with a fine, perhaps threatened with administrative proceedings. The main thing is that he doesn't have time to sneak away, Russell thought, smiling gloomily. He needed Hardy to panic. Knowing his past, it is likely that he will decide that it's time to wind down and look for a new victim. Having collected the papers, he threw the recorder and camera into his bag. He had another idea, to record any conversation where Jace mentioned his dubious affairs, to push him to admit, at least partially, to blackmail. With such audio evidence, you can go further even to court. But that would require him to want to talk to me without Carol, Russell mused. And now they are not separated. That evening, luck still smiled on him. At about 9 in the evening, Carol went to see her friends and Jace remained in the house, twirling the television remote control in his Russell's hands. Russell, hearing the door slam, went downstairs and saw Hardy lounging on the sofa. "Are you looking for Carol?" Jace grinned, without getting up. "She left. She said it wouldn't be long." "I'm aware," Russell answered shortly. "Here you go." Jace stretched, rubbing his neck. "Maybe we can talk like men, without her. Anyway, we are essentially the owners of this house, since she allowed me to live here." He pointedly provoked, saying, "We are essentially the masters," but Russell, instead of outburst, sat down in the chair opposite and said, "We can talk, yes. Only on one condition. None of your C is normal and other nonsense. Better tell me, what are your plans?" Jace raised an eyebrow. "Plans? To take your wife away completely, if I may say so. Although it seems he already took it without your permission. What, old man, does it hurt? Or do you hope that I will leave someday?" This is it, Russell thought, turning on the recorder in his pocket. Then he will either post something or slip away. "I see that you've sat firmly on her neck," Russell said carefully. "You're probably expecting her to transfer part of the property, money, or something else to you." Jace grinned, teeth flashing. "You know, people at that age usually give in to emotions. Carol has already promised me some money to start a business. Well, if you buck and don't want to share the finances, we will always find ways for you to leave the game." "How?" "Oh, there are many ways. I won't reveal all my cards," Jace said and suddenly winced, looking around the room. "I'll say this, if you continue to undermine me, I will find a way to take revenge. You can, for example, hint to the press that the local technical inspection inspector has problems with the law and falsify the facts. And believe me, I have people who know a lot about this. Do you know how easy it is to slander a person who is not used to publicity?" Russell slowly took a breath. He knew Hardy was bluffing, at least partly, but it was all written down in his pocket. Let him continue talking, he internally encouraged himself. "So you're going to blackmail me, right?" he asked. "Why not?" Hardy snapped. "If you decide to declare war on me, I will strike. I have nothing to lose, old man. Well, almost nothing." Russell's heart was pounding so much that he was afraid. The recorder recorded not only the words, but also this frantic pounding. Nevertheless, he maintained a calm demeanor. "Okay, let it be your way. Let's see who wins." "Yeah, we'll see," Hardy said indifferently. "Okay, I'm tired of talking. I'll turn on the movie." The conversation is over. Jace did not become particularly frank further, but the very fact that he admitted blackmail, albeit indirectly, was an important detail for Russell. I'll have a recording, I already have one, and together with that check in the gym, this could be the combination that will push this scoundrel to the wall, he thought. Russell prepared his new move for a long time and carefully. While Carol and Jace were convinced that he was broken and no longer good for anything, he carefully paved the way to what could be called the final arrangement of pieces. Everything around looked crazy. Carol brought her lover into the house, they openly mocked him, and he calmly collected materials, awaited checks, and now added another direction of attack, financial. The first thing he did was almost quietly transfer all of his and Carol's shared funds into a separate account opened in the name of a modest company that he registered in another county. The company had a neutral name, something like RW Inspection and Partners, distantly related to his previous work as a technical supervisor, but in fact existed only on paper. Formally, the purpose of this account looked like Russell was receiving income there from consulting on construction issues. At the bank, he explained it as a freelance business project. To finally remove Carol from the list of those with access, he took advantage of gaps in state family law. Since he was the main depositor and their marriage was not officially dissolved, the bank did not require the consent of the spouse when opening a corporate account. So all that Carol had left in her previous accounts were small balances, which were enough for household needs. The main amount flowed into the new shell. After withdrawing most of the cash, Russell put the money into the same corporate account, withdrawing his family savings as well. He did this in parts so as not to arouse suspicion. Carol didn't notice. She had long ago stopped looking at the electronic bank and left the cash to Jace as if it didn't matter. It seemed to her that her husband had ceased to control the finances and that the money was lying there somewhere, especially since Jace repeated to her, "Soon I will launch a business, and we will surprise everyone." Russell only smiled cynically in his heart. He'll start a business. He thought mentally, I'd like to see how this rogue will beg for funds when he himself finds himself broke. The second step was re-registration of the house. A couple of years ago, Russell's younger brother, Douglas, moved to a neighboring state, but kept in touch with him. Douglas, although he did not approve of what was happening in the family, tried not to get involved in the conflict. However, when Russell called him and asked him to take over ownership of the house for a while, his brother, without thinking twice, agreed. "I understand that you have bedlam going on there," he said in a serious tone. "If this is necessary to save at least half of your property, I will help." Making the deal was easy. Russell prepared the deed of gift, notarized the papers, and delivered them by courier to his brother. So the house officially became the property of Douglas West, and Russell himself received the right of perpetual residence as a close relative. Now, come what may, Carol couldn't lay claim to the house directly, and certainly couldn't claim Jace. Of course, neither Carol nor her lover had any idea about this turn. For all appearances, everything remained the same. In the documents that were in the box, the information had not changed, and the next property tax had not yet arrived. Russell, having received notification of the completion of the transaction, breathed a sigh of relief. Now, even if they decide to sue and seek division, he thought, they won't succeed. They won't get the house. Carol, of course, can prove that it was acquired during marriage, but given the secret deed of gift to her brother, this will turn into a complete legal headache for her. It's unlikely that she will have enough energy and time. However, all this is not enough to complete the plan. Russell decided to take a desperate step, which required some acting skills. He acted out a heart attack carefully, without excessive drama, but realistically enough for the terrified Carol to call an ambulance. The evening was calm. Carol and Jace sat in the living room, discussing the menu for the coming week. Russell walked in, pretended to join the conversation, and then suddenly grabbed his chest, began breathing heavily and sagging to the floor. His eyes allegedly rolled back. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. "What's wrong with him?" Carol screamed, rushing to her husband. "Jace, call an ambulance." Jace reacted rather sluggish, but still took out his phone. When the paramedics arrived, Russell barely opened his eyes and whispered that he had terrible pain and tingling in his chest. Of course, his pulse was fast, he was really nervous, and his blood pressure jumped, as if on cue. So the arriving doctors had no doubt. It looked like a heart attack. They took him to the hospital and connected him to an ECG machine. Carol was shaking next to her, afraid that something irreparable would happen. The next morning it turned out that the attack seemed to have subsided. The doctor, to be on the safe side, left Russell in the ward for another day, and he took advantage of the situation. He asked to issue a medical power of attorney in the name of Carol, a formal document by which she could make decisions about his treatment if the crisis suddenly recurred. In the states where they lived, such a power of attorney was issued without problems if the patient himself gave consent. Russell clearly demonstrated a willingness to trust his wife with control of his health. "You're my wife," he said to Carol in the ward, pretending to have difficulty speaking. "If something happens to me, please take care of it properly. You can sign the papers on my behalf." Fakely touched, but still concerned, Carol agreed. She believed that she was gaining part of the power over her husband. "Well, now he definitely won't be able to contradict me." We filled out the necessary papers, and by the end of the second day Russell was safely on the mend and returned home. Doctors recommended a calm lifestyle, avoiding stress, and not arguing with loved ones. And Carol looked at him with narrowed eyes, thinking that now he would probably calm down completely. After all, life is precious. But Russell had no intention of calming down. The power of attorney document became his hidden trump card. Since he is officially vulnerable, it means that Carol is now obliged to show that she is truly caring for her husband. But how she takes care of her is a big question. Russell began to carefully record all the cases when Carol went to Jace's all night and left the sick without attention. He even recorded phone conversations where she refused to help him with shopping or medications. A little later, he involved his lawyer friend, whom he trusted in this case. He explained, "If it comes to trial in court, for example, during a divorce or during the division of property, you can prove that, having received a medical power of attorney, your wife did not actually carry out any marital duties, but, on the contrary, left you in a dangerous situation. And in general, she used your ill health as a reason to get additional rights. This is a powerful argument in your favor." Russell just nodded, pursing his lips. He did not feel much pleasure thinking about these schemes. After all, it concerned a person who was once dear to him. But events have gone too far. Meanwhile, Jace continued to live in the house, and his joint antics with Carol only became more pronounced. At night, they locked themselves in the bedroom, laughed, sometimes turned on loud music, and in the morning Carol, yawning, asked Russell for money for groceries, supposedly for him. "After all, you are on sick leave, you need light food." But she ended up leaving with Jace, and the bag from the store contained delicacies and alcohol, and not what the doctor prescribed. At some point, Russell decided to set her up, especially subtly. With the help of the same lawyer friend, he organized a meeting with a bank employee, where Carol formally still had a joint account. They invited Carol under the pretext of discussing Russell's health insurance, and there, on the spot, it became clear that there was almost no money left in the account. A polite employee hinted, "Apparently Mr. West transferred it to his new business account." Carol went on the offensive, demanding an explanation. "Where are our finances? I need to pay for my husband's treatment." Russell calmly watched her seethe. It was enough for him to utter a couple of cold phrases. "Did I ask you to pay for my treatment? I have everything under control. And for other expenses. If you really spent money on me, where are the receipts and doctor's prescriptions?" She was choking with indignation, but could not provide evidence. Then the bank employee, smiling politely, offered to take out additional insurance in case of heart disease, but Carol refused. Obviously, such a policy was of no use to her, because in reality she was not involved in her husband's health. As she left, she slammed the door loudly, and Jace, who was accompanying her, hissed under his breath that this is all a waste of time, and that they will soon resolve the issue differently. But they could not respond to these manipulations in any way. Carol had almost no money at her disposal. The house formerly belonged to Russell's brother, and the medical power of attorney only obligated her to monitor her husband's recovery, which she, in fact, did not do. When enough facts had accumulated, Russell held a real mini-tribunal in the living room. He chose an evening when Carol and Jace were home and said he wanted to discuss the future. The young lover, waiting for some empty conversation, lounged on the sofa, and Carol, crossing her arms over her chest, stood next to him. "Well, what are you up to again?" she asked, displeased. "I want you both to know I met with a lawyer the other day," Russell said hoarsely, pointing to a folder lying on the table. "All the papers are here. To begin with, the fact that the house no longer belongs to me. Gifted to my brother. Here is the donation agreement. I think your plans for my place can be finished." He paused, watching with pleasure as Carol's face paled. Jace frowned. "What nonsense. You had no right to do that. This is joint property." Russell smiled coldly. "Maybe, but now let your jointness try to challenge this tranche in court. And I proved that I was in a painful condition, so I transferred the property to my brother in order to protect the family. You will have to prove the opposite, and before and not after my attack. Good luck." "How dare you?" Carol exclaimed, torn between anger and confusion. "That's it." Russell was not embarrassed. "Next, all my money went to a new account of my company. You are not included there. You and your boyfriend will not receive anything from the bank. Last thing, do you remember the medical power of attorney that I wrote out in your name? It clearly states that you are obliged to control my regimen and costs associated with treatment. And here," he patted the folder, "are reports that you never bought me the medications I needed, didn't show up to my doctor, didn't pay for my insurance policy. Simply put, you don't even fulfill the role you took on, but use me as a paper patient to hide behind concern. This whole circus is recorded." "You bastard," Carol hissed, digging her nails into the edge of the sofa. You lied to me about your heart?" "Some of the symptoms were real," he shrugged. "But as you can see, I am completely alive and capable. And now I'm ready to confirm in court that, having received the rights to my treatment, you actually abandoned me to my own devices. And from everything you can see, all the care fell to Jace, who also didn't try very hard. Or do you think that at night, when you listen to loud music and drink champagne, you are playing the role of a nurse?" Jace jumped up, his face twisted with anger. "You know, old man, I'll rip your throat out now for such impudence." "Come on, try," Russell answered calmly, without moving from his place. "I have a voice recorder on. You're threatening me, and if you raise your hand, you'll go to the police on assault charges. I don't know how much Carol would want to get you out from behind bars." For a second or two, no one moved. Carol was breathing heavily, and Jace was clenching his fists, but he didn't dare come closer. Everything was collapsing before their eyes. Finally, Carol began to scream. You knew all this time. You pretended to be a pathetic, deceived husband while you were preparing the documents. How did you have enough conscience?" "Conscience." Russell allowed himself to grind for the first time. "And when you brought your lover to the house and offered me a 3, what kind of conscience were you talking about? Or when you both convinced me that I was a helpless, feeble old man? Now there is no need to complain that I acted harshly." The silence was so deafening that you could hear the ticking of a clock behind the walls. Carol sobbed, but there seemed to be more disgust in her eyes than remorse. Jace clenched his teeth and glanced at her, either calling for further action or asking for support. But Carol didn't seem ready to take the risk. She essentially had no trump cards left. "So what now?" she muttered, looking at her husband. "Whatever," Russell said coldly. "You can leave with this guy, you can try to challenge the papers. But I warn you, I have enough records to prove how you groomed me and wasted general finances. I can file for divorce and get a decision in my favor. I might also file a motion for fraud on Jace's part if he takes anything that belongs to the family." "So you think you've won?" she muttered in a compressed voice. "Not at all," he answered wearily. I simply removed the opportunity for you to continue to mock me, live at my expense, and count on my property. This is all." He paused, then turned to Jace. "And one more thing. You were never able to legalize your status as a coach. There's a test coming up at the gym, and if you don't disappear from town or give up work, all your past exploits may come to light. It's up to you to decide, but I advise you to pack your things." With these words, Russell calmly left the living room, leaving them alone among scattered papers and crumbling illusions. There was no triumph in his soul, rather cold relief. He knew that in the near future either Jace would realize that it was all over, or the two of them would try to somehow get a bite, but they had zero resources. The house is not theirs, the money is not available, Carol has only obligations before the law, no benefit. Stepping into the corridor, he heard Carol's muffled scream, either a sob or a curse addressed to him. He felt sad that life had descended into such a swamp. But now he couldn't let his feelings take over. All he could do was go outside, breathe in the cool evening air, and mentally repeat, "I did this to save at least a drop of myself. If they wanted war, then they got it." And in the gathering twilight, he felt that his heart, despite the recent attacks, was beating more evenly than before. The plan was completed, the financial trap had slammed shut, and the role of a helpless husband remained only a mask that he had finally thrown off. Russell felt empty and relieved at the same time. For the past few days, he had been living as if on autopilot mode, collecting papers, finishing things at work, taking things into a small storage box that he wanted to take with him, but could not reveal it to Carol or Jace. He remained in their common house almost nominally, spending the night in his closet room, and saw his wife less and less. It seems she and Jace still didn't know that the final blow was almost here. It was the end of the work week when he finally decided to leave. Just the day before, the results came from the gym. Nick Bradley, Russell's longtime friend from the police, said that the inspection had been completed and many violations had been found. Formally, Jace could receive an administrative punishment or a fine. But the most important thing is that among the papers transferred anonymously, there were video materials incriminating him in his unprofessional work methods. The videos allegedly show Jace doing fitness sessions with several married clients, including local power wives, and none of this is like regular training. There was nothing stopping the club owner from kicking Jace out the door so as not to lose his reputation. That same night, Russell quietly packed his suitcase, packed his laptop and important documents into a small bag, and went out onto the porch. He looked around. The house was plunged into darkness. Only in one of the bedrooms there was a light on. It's true that Carol and Jace could be arguing about something, or maybe, on the contrary, while away the evening, mocking their husband behind closed doors. But from now on their opinion did not matter. All he wanted was to leave the pain and contempt behind. Before leaving, he left an envelope on the kitchen table. It contained a short handwritten note, a final appeal to his wife, and a flash drive with video evidence that would remain the most painful discovery for her. On the flash drive, Russell uploaded the same selection of fragments where Jace not only hugged with other clients, but engaged in such frank training with them that it would be clear to anyone. His work is a scam and promiscuity. And no, these were not just the cream of the crop. Russell added old records here that he obtained through acquaintances in northern towns, where Jace had already appeared in scandals. If Carol wants to be convinced that this guy was leading her by the nose, she will see everything in all its humiliating beauty. The flash drive was not the only copy. Russell prudently sent these files to two more destinations: to the school where Carol once worked, and to the fitness club, the owner of which was already eyeing Jace with suspicion. It wasn't difficult to do. Email, a couple of secret addresses, that's all. It may have seemed cruel, but after everything that had happened, Russell felt no guilt. Let them finally find out the truth about Jace and what Carol herself agreed to, he thought. He left both of them with, in fact, a complete collapse of their reputations. And although Carol herself did not appear in these videos, it is clear that a scandal will immediately arise around former school teacher, which one was pulled in, or was she no better herself? In any case, her name will come up, especially since the mailing also affected the circle of former colleagues. Modern social networks quickly pick up such rumors, so Carol faced humiliating fame in her hometown. Just before leaving the threshold, Russell glanced over his shoulder at the wall where family photographs hung once upon a time when they were young, smiling at the camera, hugging their children. He felt a painful tightening in his chest, but only for a moment. That world collapsed long ago, and its remains turned into ruins. Exhaling quietly, he turned and left. The door slammed loudly. Essentially, that sounded like the end point. A few hours later, when it was already light in the house, Carol woke up and found that the hallway was silent, and neither Russell's bag nor his jacket were in the kitchen. Noticing the envelope on the table, she frowned. Jace Sleepy, wearing only jeans, came out to meet her and rubbed his eyes. "What do you have there?" he asked, yawning. "I don't know. Some kind of letter," she answered, tearing open the envelope. The envelope contained only a piece of paper and a flash drive in a transparent case. Carol quickly scanned line by line. "Carol, I held on for a long time, trying to save what had already died. You thought I was broken, but I was just waiting for the moment to pay you back for everything. You were given a choice. Go to him and live in deception, or stay and see who he really was. I don't care. I'm leaving to start a new life. Look at the contents of the flash drive if you want to know who Jace is. This is not a stuffing, but a real video filmed by him and his accomplices in the very cities where he managed to recruit victims. I hope that someday you will remember that our life could have turned out differently if you had not fallen into this abyss of lies. Goodbye." "Russell." Carol turned pale. A mixture of fear and anger froze in his eyes. Jace frowned, glancing briefly at the paper. "What kind of flash drive?" he asked, holding out his hand to take it. "I don't know," he writes. "There's something about you," she muttered. "Something about your clients." "Bullshit," he snorted, trying to confidently brush it off, but concern still crept into his voice. "Bring the laptop, we'll see now." They quickly turned on Carol's old laptop and inserted the flash drive. The first files launched at random were videos of an obviously intimate nature, apparently filmed on a mobile phone or a surveillance camera. On the screen are Jace himself, too well recognizable by his tattoos and physique, and some older woman, clearly not Carol. Then another entry and another. Somewhere he persuades a client to invest money in projects. Somewhere he performs open caresses in front of the camera. The comments heard behind the scenes are savory and vulgar. Snippets flashed by where he could be heard promising, "If you tell your husband, I'll post our videos online." Seeing all this, Carol immediately turned even whiter. Either horror or frustration overwhelmed her. Jace cursed, pressing keys, trying to rewind or close the program, but the recordings were in different formats. There were many of them, a whole folder. "Where did he get this from?" Jace burst out. "Damn, I didn't think that." He stopped. "Shut up," he shouted, crushing the piece of paper with the letter with his fist. "I didn't have to report to you about my past connections. What difference does it make to you?" "What difference does it make?" Carol slammed her palm on the table and bent over, as if she had run out of strength inside. "There's a whirl in my head. So, I'm not even the only victim. And he, it turns out, could have been doing the same thing all this time. How could she get involved in this?" While they were arguing, a new email was already flashing in Carol's inbox on her phone. Messages from colleagues from school with shocking headlines like, "Did you see that, Carol? What kind of horror is this?" In chats where everyday discussions used to take place, now scandalous material has surfaced. Someone anonymously sent a link to uploaded videos featuring a famous fitness trainer in the city. Some women in the comments already recognized Jace and were indignant, some were bashfully silent, and some scoffed. And nearby words emerged about Carol as a stupid wife who traded a decent husband for this womanizer. "Oh God," she whispered, reading the next message. My name is already being mentioned. They say I covered it all up. It's okay, we'll figure it out, Jace hissed, nervously tapping his fingers. I don't care about these women. We can move, I'll get the money. What money? Carol snapped. Russell took everything we had. The house is registered in his brother's name. Our joint account is empty. Do you even understand that I'm out of work now? For this, I will finally be thrown out of school, although I no longer work there, but the reputation. This is a town, everyone knows everything. Jace, in fact, did not feel much solidarity. His interest in Carol had always been selfish, feeling that there was no way to get money out of her, and now there was a scandal all over the city. He frantically considered whether it would be better for him to simply disappear. Secretly, he was afraid that the police would make his past blackmail cases public. But the videos leaked by Russell could be the first step towards an official investigation. That is, the feint of moving may not save you. It is known that in the United States, such stories quickly gain viral popularity, and Jace did not want to go to jail. Listen, I'll figure it out myself, he finally blurted out, rushing towards the exit from the kitchen. I'll leave this damned city. Go to hell with your tantrums. Are you leaving me? Carol shouted, her voice breaking. What can I do? You don't have a penny, the house is not yours, everyone around you is laughing. Do I need your support? No, Jace laughed evilly. I was looking for opportunities, but now your hubby has destroyed everything. So goodbye. Without giving her a chance to answer, he left. Carol sank exhaustedly to the floor, covering her face with her hands, unable to squeeze out either tears or anger. She understood that all her connections in the city were ruined. Even if they don't fire you from their formal part-time jobs, there is no longer a normal future. The son and daughter who found out about what was happening would probably turn away or be shocked, and she would become a grandmother in shame to her grandchildren. And the distribution of compromising evidence is already spinning its flywheel. Whatever she did now, in fact, everything collapsed for her. Her marriage, her position in society, and the imaginary youth to which she wanted to return through her lover. So she remained on the cold floor, in the very kitchen where she had recently mockingly offered her husband a 3. Now there was an oppressive silence all around, interrupted only by rare signals of new letters and messages on the phone. Obviously, each of them carried another train of shame. Meanwhile, Russell was already driving along the highway, which stretched towards the neighboring state and further towards the mountains of Montana. It was not by chance that he chose this route. In his youth, he dreamed of visiting there. He also told Carol that, after retirement, we'll move north, we'll fish in the mountain rivers and admire the beauty. But life turned out differently, and now he wanted to go exactly there to start everything from scratch. The radio was playing in the car, and unremarkable suburban landscapes flashed past the window. Russell experienced a keen sense of freedom, although the bitterness remained, like a sediment somewhere in the pit of his stomach. But he knew, one way or another, he did what he considered necessary and received his cruel but fair retribution. There was no point in hoping for a return to the old ways. Everything that could burn, burned. Now we have to move on with our lives, he thought. About a week later, he reached a small town in Montana there. As it turned out, there was one of the sawmill companies that was looking for a technical supervision officer. He contacted them in advance, and after some negotiations, he was offered a temporary position as a structural safety consultant. Checking into a modest motel, Russell spent the next few days filing paperwork to get started. He had funds, the company RW Inspection and Partners, to which he transferred the money, consisted of only one person himself. He could afford to live without haste and fuss for the first months. He was polite with his new colleagues, but kept aloof. He no longer wanted to get close to anyone. He understood that he was not yet ready to open up. But soon he still had to contact the local insurance service, and there he met a woman named Martha. About 50 years old, she turned out to be a person who clearly knew firsthand about family tragedies. In a conversation over documents and signatures, he casually mentioned his recent heart attack, and Martha, frowning, said that she herself had gone through a divorce when her husband ran away. leaving her with a bunch of debts. As a result, she lost her home, her status, suffered a nervous breakdown, and now started her life again here in Montana. "I know what it's like," she said, draining her paper cup of coffee, "when someone you trusted betrays you. But thank God, you men also get caught up in this. I apologize, maybe I sounded rude." "I understand," Russell nodded with a sad smile. "You know, Martha, you and I are probably similar in some ways. We both had to run away so as not to go crazy. Since then, they began to intersect from time to time, either on work issues or simply in a local cafe, small, secluded. A cautious, distrustful sympathy developed between them. No rose-colored glasses, each understood that the other had heavy baggage behind him. But this was the special respect. No one tried to pretend that the past was a trifle. Sometimes, sitting in the car after a cup of coffee with Martha, Russell thought about Carol and wondered, have I ever been happy with her? Or have we been heading towards the abyss for a long time? But these thoughts no longer stung his heart painfully, rather they reminded him of the lesson he had learned. Most of all, he missed his children and grandchildren, but he hoped that over time they would get in touch. At least he didn't refuse contact. "I just wouldn't want them to be left with a distorted version that he himself abandoned his family." But the children were already adults. They had their own lives, and perhaps they would understand everything when they found out what kind of story their mother had built. A month passed, after which he more or less settled down. "I rented a small cottage on the outskirts of the town. It was quiet there, and the pine trees rustled in the yard. As far as possible, he began to immerse himself in everyday life. Sometimes he chopped wood for the fireplace, cleared the driveway of fallen pine needles. One day Martha stopped by to see him, seeing him fiddling with tools. They started talking, and to Russell's surprise, she suggested, "Do you want me to help you? I always dreamed of learning how to repair a fence, otherwise I lived in an apartment all my life." "Come on, why not?" he smiled. "True, the fence is old, the boards need to be replaced. Then it will be even more useful," she nodded, picking up the gloves. Later, they drank tea right on the porch, covered with a blanket, and looked at the thick fog that was descending from the mountains. Russell felt an unusual warmth, but not the naive one that happens in his youth. Here everything was simpler, more mature, or something. Two people, after the tragedies that burned their lives, now quietly, without further ado, shared simple joy. We live, and we are not alone in our pain. "Tell me, do you ever want to return to your old family?" Martha asked carefully, sipping her tea. "No," Russell shook his head, lowering his eyes. "There's nothing left to save. And I'm not sure I can forgive. Neither her nor myself for bringing it all to this point. I only feel sorry for my children, and I feel sorry for the lost years. But nothing can be returned." Martha nodded. She understood this like no one else. A slight expression of sadness trembled on her cheek, and then she squeezed out a soft smile. "Well then, let's look forward. I like it here, and it looks like you too." "Yes," he agreed quietly. "Sometimes it's cool here, but the air is clean, and the mountains are beautiful." They sat for a little longer in silence. Sometimes words are not needed to warm up with mutual trust. Several thousand miles away, in an old house in the Midwest, Carol sat alone, watching as people gradually shunned her, as if from the plague. Colleagues from school one after another wrote back with evasive phrases on social networks. Some, on the contrary, were openly sarcastic. After all, scandalous videos were associated with her. Jace didn't return. They said he ran away, fearing arrest. The house belonged to Douglas West, and he was going to come soon to check on the condition of the property. Carol, in essence, became a temporary guest who could be asked to leave at any moment. All those who once admired her youthful appearance and courage now looked at each other, laughing behind her back, whispering that she had traded her reliable husband for some gigolo. Neighbor Mrs. Green, who used to bring them baked goods, now coldly greeted her through the fence, as if afraid of contaminating shame. In local chats, links to those same videos were sent, and speculation multiplied. Carol supposedly had some other connections. The ungrateful inventions had no evidence, but who was interested in the truth? The scandal lives not on facts, but on rumors. Sitting in an empty living room, looking at old photographs, she bitterly realized that her former measured life was over. This is not exactly what she dreamed of when leaving her boring life. Now she had to deal with debt receipts, the fate of the house, lawyers, and most importantly, the hatred of the residents. The boy and girl, her children, were also in no hurry to show their participation. When they heard rumors, they called back once, but the conversation turned out to be difficult. The daughter said directly, "Mom, I don't want to interfere in your mess. He only degrades you." The son was more neutral, but his wife and children lived far away, and he had no intention of moving to help his mother. So Carol was left with the realization of her guilt, or maybe with resentment towards the whole world, who knows. No love, no money, no reputation, everything slipped away like sand through your fingers. And in this silent house, she increasingly remembered how Russell once installed a windowsill with his own hands, how he put everything in order after a hurricane. And only now did she understand how stupidly she had destroyed what was real because of a fleeting thirst to return youth. Tears would have flowed like a river, but she did not know how to cry, as if a stone had fallen on her heart. All she could do now was sit and wait. Maybe there would be at least the slightest way out of this hell into which she had driven herself. And Russell, standing on the edge of a cliff in the mountains of Montana, peered into the distant horizon. The wind ruffled his hair, the sunlight sparkled on the rocky slopes. Martha walked quietly behind her, carrying a camp thermos and a couple of sandwiches in her hands. They decided to take a walk after another working week. "Beautiful, huh?" she asked, standing next to him. "Very," he answered quietly. "I dreamed of seeing such open spaces 30 years ago, but there was a lot of work, then family, then anxiety, and now it worked out. Don't you regret that everything turned out this way?" He thought about it. Looking at the horizon, he realized how much pain was left behind. But to be honest, there is nothing to regret anymore. You can't undo the past, but there was life ahead unknown, but perhaps more honest. "No," he finally answered calmly. "I did what I could, and now I just want to move on with my life. I look at these mountains and think, they have stood here for hundreds of thousands of years, they have survived everything. This means that we will survive somehow." Marta smiled and touched his elbow. "You know, it seems to me that everything will work out for us. We are without illusions, but with hope. Sometimes this is the best way." "I agree," Russell said, answering her with a short but sincere smile. They stood for some time in silence, absorbing the space and the cool wind. The sun flooded the slopes with slanting rays, and somewhere far below a stream glistened. Some kind of eagle soared over the abyss, spreading its wings. And at that moment Russell felt that he was truly free, without the bitter taste in his soul, without the slavish fear that had held him in the past. He was ready to open himself to a new stage of life, albeit with accumulated scars, but with a firm confidence in his own integrity. So ends the old story, he thought, taking one last look at the sparkling mountain peak. And he understood, another one was beginning, in which there would no longer be falsehood and betrayal, but only mountains, clean air, and, perhaps, human closeness that does not hide a knife behind one's back. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.